You remember that sound, that hypnotic beat, that voice sliding through the track like smoke in a dark room. In 2002, Addictive wasn't just playing, it was everywhere. Cars, clubs, radio countdowns. For a moment, Truth Hurts sounded like the next woman R&B was about to make room for. And then, the room closed. Not because she couldn't sing, not because the song failed, but because the same machine that introduced her to the world suddenly had no space left to protect her. How does the biggest song of your life become the thing that buries you? So, what really happened to Truth Hurts? Let's fade to black. To understand Truth Hurts, we have to go back to St. Louis, Missouri, where Sherry Watson learned that a voice could be both a gift and a warning. Before the world knew the name Truth Hurts, she was already moving through music like someone trying to be heard without being swallowed. By the late 1990s, she was writing, singing behind other people, and waiting near the edges of rooms where decisions were made. That matters, because in R&B, especially around the Aftermath universe, talent was never the full currency. Access was. Timing was. The blessing of a powerful man was. And when Dr. Dre brought her into Aftermath around 2000, it looked like the door had finally opened. Not just any door, the door attached to one of hip-hop's most feared and respected machines. But here's what nobody tells you about being discovered. Sometimes the same hand that lifts you is the hand that decides how high you are allowed to rise. Truth Hurts entered that world with a voice full of smoke, ache, and church-trained control. But she did not enter it with ownership. She did not enter it with leverage. She entered it as promise. And promises in the music business can become property very quickly. Before Addictive ever played on the radio, the trap was already being built. A brilliant woman, a powerful label, and a dream that came with invisible strings tightened before sunrise and silence. When Addictive arrived in 2002, it didn't feel like a debut single. It felt like a spell. The beat had that slow, dangerous sway, and Rakim's voice gave it street gravity. But Truth Hurts was the ghost in the center of it. She did not oversing. She did not beg for attention. She floated through the record like she already knew the melody was cursed. That was the brilliance of it. Addictive sounded expensive, mysterious, and slightly forbidden. It fit the early 2000s moment perfectly, when R&B was moving closer to hip-hop, and female vocalists were being framed not just as singers, but as moods, images, and fantasies. Truth Hurts looked like she belonged in that world. She had the polish, the beauty, the voice, and the cosign. Being signed to Aftermath meant the public did not have to wonder whether she was important. The label was telling them she was. For a while, the machine worked. The song climbed, the video circulated, and suddenly, her name was attached to Dr. Dre, Rakim, and a sound people could not ignore. That kind of launch can feel like protection. When your first major record is everywhere, you start to believe the floor beneath you is solid. You start to believe the people who open the door will keep standing there. But that's not the twist. The twist is that her identity was being built around one song before she had enough space to become a full artist. The public knew the hook, the beat, the smoky voice. But did they know Sherry Watson? Did they know what she wanted to sound like beyond that record? Did they know her pain, her range, her humor, her history? Or did they only know the product? That question matters because the song's power was also its danger. Addictive depended on a sample that would become legally complicated. And Truth Hurts, like many new artists, was not the person holding the clearance paperwork or negotiating the risk. Yet she was the face of the moment. She was the one audiences saw. She was the one people would remember when everything started to crack. The cruel thing about a breakout hit is that it can become a mirror you are forced to live inside. Every room wants that version of you again. Every interview circles back to the same record. Every label conversation becomes a question of whether lightning can be manufactured twice. And underneath the applause, something colder was forming. A career was being measured before it had matured. A woman was being packaged before she had been fully introduced. The song was everywhere, but ownership of the story was not. And this is where everything started to slip. Because beneath the glitter of that first victory, the question was already waiting. Who would protect Truth Hurts when her own hit became too dangerous to carry? The hand over Truth Hurts' career was not invisible. It had names, offices, release schedules, and priorities. At the center was Aftermath Entertainment, the house Dr. Dre built into a symbol of power. When that machine moved, radio listened. When that machine went quiet, silence could feel like a verdict. For a new artist, that kind of cosign is intoxicating. It makes you look chosen, but it also means your career is tied to decisions you may not control. The label controlled the rollout. The label controlled the legal response. The label controlled whether the story around Addictive became a temporary complication or a permanent stain. Here's what the contracts don't say out loud. The artist can become responsible in public for choices made above her head. If a sample is not cleared properly, the singer becomes the face people recognize, even if she was not the person negotiating the paperwork. Truth Hurts carried the image of the hit, but not the power behind it. That is, the darker side of being launched by giants. You shine because their light is on you. Then, if the light moves, people assume you stopped glowing. In one frame, she was a new R&B voice with momentum. In the next, she was attached to a problem the company no longer wanted to center. A radio hit became a liability, and the woman inside it became easier to abandon without making any public noise. By the time the trouble became public, the song was already moving like it belonged to everyone. That is what made it so cruel. Addictive wasn't some forgotten album cut quietly buried on a track list. It was the record, the introduction, the proof that Truth Hurts could step into a crowded R&B landscape and make people turn their heads. Then, while the song was still rising, the sample dispute moved from the background into the center of the story. And suddenly, the thing that was supposed to make her undeniable became the thing everyone had to explain. That is the horror of it. Not a public meltdown, not a bad performance, not a voice failing under pressure. A legal issue, reportedly tied to music she did not personally control, began eating through the momentum of her first major moment. She didn't lose her moment slowly. It was taken mid-air. Let that sit for a second. Imagine hearing your song everywhere, feeling the world open, and then realizing the door was attached to paperwork you never held. For Truth Hurts, success collapsed inside the celebration. But the lawsuit wasn't the real ending. After that, the fall did not look dramatic from the outside. That might be the saddest part. There was no single televised collapse. No one moment where the public could point and say, "There, that is where it ended." Instead, the machine simply began to turn its face away. Yesterday, Truth Hurts was the woman with the dangerous hit, the Dre connection, the Rakim feature, the voice people wanted to identify. Then, the legal noise grew louder, the rollout became heavier, and the next chapter never arrived with the same force. In this industry, silence is louder than failure. Because failure at least gives you a story. Silence gives you nothing. No explanation, no closure. Just a slow removal from rooms where your name used to be mentioned. And once the machine stops saying your name, the audience starts believing you were never meant to last. That is how a turning point becomes a disappearance. Not overnight, but through 100 small withdrawals. Less promotion, fewer headlines, fewer chances to correct the narrative, fewer people willing to invest in the second act. Dr. Dre and Aftermath moved on to other priorities, as powerful labels always do. But Truth Hurts was left carrying the weight of a moment she did not fully control. The song had made her visible, the aftermath made her vanish, and the cruelest part is this. To the public, it looked like she simply had nothing else to say. What came after was not emptiness, it was worse than that. It was being remembered in fragments. For Truth Hurts, the world did not completely forget her. That might sound like mercy, but it can become another kind of prison. Because when people remember only one song, they do not remember the person. They remember the hook, the beat, the summer, the way the record made them feel before they ever ask what it cost the woman singing it. And maybe the real damage wasn't her career. Maybe it was what happens inside a person when the loudest moment of their life becomes the only moment anyone allows them to have. There were attempts to keep going. More music, more appearances, more chances to prove that Addictive was not the full story. But the public memory had already hardened. Once the industry labels you as a moment, it becomes hard to be seen as a human being still moving, still growing, still carrying new songs inside you. That is the quiet cruelty of the one-hit wonder narrative. It sounds harmless, almost funny, until you realize it can erase years of labor, training, hope, and survival. It turns a complicated artist into a trivia answer, and somewhere beneath that label was Sherry Watson. Not just Truth Hurts, not just the woman on a Dr. Dre record, not just the voice beside Rakim, a real person who had touched the edge of permanence, then watched the door close without an explanation, loud enough for the world to hear. So the open question remains, how many artists didn't fail at all? How many were simply paused, shelved, and rewritten by a business that moved on before they could breathe? Truth Hurts did not disappear because the voice was not enough. That is the easy version, the version the industry likes, because it makes every vanished artist look responsible for their own erasure. But her story tells us something darker. Sometimes talent gets you through the door, but power decides whether you are allowed to stay. She had the song, she had the moment, she had the cosign. For a brief second, everything looked aligned. But when the legal trouble came and the machine had to choose between protecting the artist or protecting itself, the silence told the truth. The system did not need Sherry Watson to survive. It only needed the record until the record became inconvenient. And that is why her story still matters. Because Truth Hurts was not just a one-hit wonder. She was a warning about what happens when an artist's identity is built on borrowed power. When the spotlight is loaned, it can be taken back without apology. When your name belongs to a machine, the machine can stop saying it. And maybe that is the question we are left with now. Not why did she vanish, but what does it do to a person when the world hears you once, then refuses to listen again? So the next time Addictive comes on, maybe we should hear more than nostalgia. Maybe we should hear the woman inside the hit, still asking to be remembered whole.